given that you were in Malaysia or you have been in Malaysia for so long, I can imagine that you mix with both expat and local teachers, right?
Yes, it's very difficult to kind of just stay. Not that I would ever want to. As I said, some of the expat teachers can be a little bit tricky. But at the first international school, there was a much bigger local cohort of teachers. So, yeah, made some very good friends there. Even at the second school, made some very good friends, both local and expat. I think maybe coming from South Africa and kind of being very aware of racial tension, I try to avoid it, and any kind of divisions, whether it's based on skin color or nationality. Yeah, I like to meet people from different walks of life and everything like that.
Hello guys, welcome to another episode of Chat with Khian. And before I introduce to you our guest for today, I would like to give a big shout out to FNK Concept. Be sure to check them out on Shopee and Lazada for cool products at reasonable prices. For today's Chat with Khian, we have Miss Holly as our guest. Miss Holly was my history teacher at A-levels back in high school, and she's from South Africa. She's currently based in Sarawak, and she is a history teacher, obviously. Miss Holly, would you want to say hi to everyone?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. So I'm really interested to know about why is it that you chose to come to Malaysia from South Africa?
Okay, so South Africa has a very complicated past and history, I suppose, even current affairs. Being a teacher, a white female teacher in South Africa, I'm not always at the top of the pecking order, I suppose, to get a job. And the pay isn't particularly brilliant. And my husband wanted to freelance and we wanted to start a family. So we decided to take the plunge and look for something overseas where it could be a little bit more lucrative. We could survive on my salary as a teacher, and then he could set up his business. And he chose Malaysia because of the weather. He likes warm weather. So yeah, that's how we ended up in Malaysia.
How was it like when you first came to Malaysia?
Not at all. No, I suppose it was a little bit like I expected it. I actually left my husband in South Africa. He was finishing off a whole lot of things. So I left him there for 3 months. He joined me, a couple of months later. And when I first arrived, I was on my own. And then 3 days after I landed in KL, I took a pregnancy test and discovered that I was pregnant.
My gosh.
So I spent my first trimester without my husband, with my first kid. So that was an interesting experience.
That must have been very difficult, right? Not being with your husband.
It's sad that he missed a couple of things. I mean, not much really happens that he can feel. It mostly happened to me, but I think the most difficult was we were on different time zones. So when I actually found out, I was by myself and I had nobody good to call when I wanted to celebrate. And it was just like I would have to wait a couple of hours before he was awake. And then anytime anything happened, going to doctor's appointments, I would do that alone. Not entirely fun. But I think the worst was that throughout the pregnancy, I had quite bad morning sickness. So he didn't see all of that. He just saw most of it, I suppose.
He had 6 months left, right?
Yes, and even during those 6 months, I was still quite ill. So I think he got a good feel for what it was like.
But oh my gosh, it must have been so difficult because I can somewhat understand how it feels like to be away from family and then being in a different time zone as well, because I was in Canada for almost one academic year, right? So yeah, it's not the best feeling ever. When you're in Malaysia, when you were initially in Malaysia, did you stay alone or?
No, when I first moved, I came and I was put up in a house that was owned by the owners of the company that I was working for, and the other teacher was staying in the same house, quite a nice large house, but we stayed there, and then we could choose to move out if we wanted to. So stayed with him. The unfortunate thing about that situation, not just living with him, working with him, was he was a smoker.
Oh.
And one of the lovely side effects or things that happened during the pregnancy was that my sense of smell increased. And I think that added to the morning sickness. So kind of, you would walk into the room and I would have to run out and throw up somewhere in a bathroom, obviously. So that not entirely the most comfortable situation there.
I can imagine. Like, I was really lucky when I was in Canada. I had a roommate, but then my roommate was pretty all right. Like, he wasn't weird or anything like that. But I have friends who had dodgy roommates and housemates, and they would complain, and I would be like, oh, okay, I am so glad that I do not have to experience that. Speaking of
there can be horror stories. My symptoms, yes. Oh, lots of those.
I mean, like, speaking about how your sense of smell became more sensitive, though, I think it's something really interesting to talk about because the food in Malaysia can have a strong smell.
Yes, definitely. Obviously, there's that the wonderful durian. I couldn't get very close to that just because it would make me so sick. I have actually tried it. Still not my favorite, but at least I have tried it. I still can't get over that smell because it brings back memories of needing to throw up. But the food has actually been quite, it's different but similar to a lot of South African food because our cultures mix. But the variety of food, I think, in Malaysia is one thing that definitely Malaysia is going for it. I mean, there's a whole type of things. But that being said, it's not everybody's cup of tea. The roommate, my work colleague, my first work colleague, he was actually from Canada, and he struggled majorly with the food. The owners of the company, our bosses, wanted us to experience a lot of things, so they took us out and they asked us to try different things, and I was okay with that. Most things I could try. Certain things I couldn't because of the pregnancy, which was unfortunate, but I have tried them since then. But he could not eat anything. He wouldn't eat anything, and eventually ended up eating fries and Coke for every meal of the day. So yeah, and smoking along with that ended in a little bit of a very bad health situation for him. But yeah. But me, on the other hand, after I eventually gave birth, I did get to try a lot of things. Fell in love with things I still can't pronounce. So yeah. But stinky tofu is not one of them.
Stinky, oh.
I can't. Durian and stinky tofu, no, sorry. But most other things, definitely.
Do you want to name a few of your favorites?
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad, but not glad you asked that because I can't actually name them. I can't pronounce them. The dough, the roast dough, fried dough. I know you can say it for me.
Oh, the one that comes in pairs?
Yes, the pear one.
Oh.
One day, by the time I leave Malaysia, I don't know when that will be, I will be able to say that.
Oh, they're called yao za guai.
Yeah, so right. I will write it down. I know somewhere. Whenever I see it, that's what I automatically go for. And
that particular dish has a pretty rich history, though.
Yeah, I remember you did mention that. Going back to China, yeah.
Yeah. Like ancient China, and I think there were two individuals who were not good guys, or like there were a couple, I think, and they were not good people. So they decided to, the dough that comes in Paris is supposed to symbolize the couple. And then the direct translation of Yao Za Guai is actually oil fries ghost. So it's like putting the pair of them into the oil to fry them and calling them gross, you know. It's really interesting, very creative as well.
Do a lot of like, okay, another thing about Malaysia that I absolutely love is the fact that food is such a big thing. And the first thing in the morning, people ask you, have you had breakfast yet? Have you taken your breakfast? And it was always, it wasn't like, how are you or anything like that. It's, have you had breakfast? And I didn't really understand why until Mr. Paul mentioned that it's a way of asking how you are. Because if you've eaten, then you're obviously in pretty good health, that you've actually had food. And that just made everything click for me. And I was like, oh my gosh, I get it. That's right. Like everybody asks about food and it's always about the food. It's not because there is so much and there's such a variety of food, but it's because it's about your health and they're actually asking how you are. Is that right? I don't know. I'd like to believe that.
That is very interesting because I really haven't really thought about that. Like, yeah, like I don't see any other cultures who say how are you by asking if you have had your, you know, breakfast, lunch, or dinner. That is really interesting. Like, oh my gosh, pretty mind blowing as well. I've never put a lot of thought into that, but I guess you're right. You know, because I guess sound body, sound mind. So we wouldn't want to be full than to be hungry, right?
True, absolutely, yeah. So I think that explained a lot of what Malaysia's food culture kind of means and why it's so important. When I first moved down to Sarawak, well, before I moved down, everybody was telling me about the food. It's the first thing they mention is the food in Sarawak. You've got to try the rice, I think, from Cebu, something like that. And then the seafood is always very fresh. And I'm like, okay, anything else about Sarawak? And they're like, no, just the food. It's all about the food. So yeah. Now, anytime visitors come from overseas, we also find places to take them for food. It's, I suppose, our culture now as well. But it's all about food.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine that. Like, I'm not super familiar with Sarawak, but then like Ipoh and Penang, I really like, and I think that the factor that stands out for both of these places are also the food. So, so it's yeah, food is a big thing. Like when I was in Canada, and people ask me about, you know, what's so special about Malaysia. The first thing, of course, would be the language because we speak quite a number of languages,
Yeah.
and that would be followed by the food. We have really interesting food, and when people say that, you know, Singaporean food is good, then we would not be super happy. So,
I've also heard that the Singaporeans stole quite a lot of Malaysian dishes. They call it Singaporean.
I would like to think so, like, but I wouldn't be so brave to say. But yeah, we have a lot of similarities, like so many that it's uncanny. So yeah. Well,
The other awesome thing, sorry, about food, yes, it's going to be about food, is what I loved was the fact that bacon and pork is such a big staple for Chinese cultures, or in Chinese culture. And then the country is 67% Malay, Muslim, and they don't eat pork. And you can have these two competing kind of food cultures living next to each other, and you can walk down. When we were living in a condo, I walked down the corridor and I would smell bacon. And right next door to where they were cooking bacon, there was a Muslim family, living very peacefully. And I just absolutely love the fact that, you know, they can live together so harmoniously in close proximity, I suppose.
yeah, it's really heartwarming to think about this because many a time there are people who think that, you know, if we are different, we can't live together, or, you know, things like that. But thinking about that, like I really haven't thought about that as well. But now that you mentioned, I think it's a really beautiful thing that people who have different beliefs and ideals and cultures can live together pretty harmoniously, somewhat harmoniously.
Yeah, there's always going to be tension here and there, but I mean, it's better than a lot of places.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I understand that you have been in Malaysia for many years right now. I think like 7 years, right? 8 years,
just like
7 years.
so.
But we are obviously in an unprecedented time, with the movement control order. How, has that been affecting you a lot?
As a teacher, yes, I suppose it affects everybody in different ways. And teachers have had a lot of the spotlight because we have to move from face-to-face teaching to suddenly teaching in a totally new realm. So that side, yes, family-wise as well, because I left KL during it wasn't a lockdown, it was easing off just before the third wave. And my first daughter's passport hadn't arrived yet, so she couldn't join me. So I left my husband again in KL, and I came down with my youngest. And so for the first 4 months of this new contract, my youngest and I were alone. 126 days sitting up once again in a new sort of environment. So, yeah, personally, it's been a roller coaster, I suppose, work-wise as well. I've also found that it's been very telling about certain people. I think the world has become closer, that we talk more about a lot of things, but also that might not always be a good thing. Hearing stories or things that friends and people I know are doing during, when they're supposed to be socially distancing, they're not. They're finding every means to kind of break the SOPs and get close to people. And yeah, having house parties. I remember in the first lockdown, there were people trying to get their friends into their condos, and just I understand if you're living alone, it's one of those pet peeves of mine that it irritates me. So yeah, I found out a lot about people in that way.
Yeah, I can definitely understand where you're coming from, because for myself, other than grocery shopping, which is like an essential thing to do, right? I have not actually left the house. And then when I do go grocery shopping, I see a lot of people who don't really wear their masks properly, or who don't wear a mask at all. Like, that is very scary. It's like, no wonder that the number of active cases is so high every day, and it's just very sad.
And then it doesn't seem like people are that concerned anymore with getting the virus. I don't know why. Maybe they're bored, but it might. I don't know if it's a Malaysian thing or if it's a worldwide thing. But, yeah, there are some horror stories of people visiting friends knowing that they're actually positive, and then going to visit people anyway and not really caring about anybody else. So I find it very selfish.
Yeah, it's really scary. Like, there was one time when I had first level contact with someone who was tested positive from badminton, and then I had to get tested, and it was during final season for me. And like, knowing that I was staying with like 7 other people in my house, I was like, oh my gosh, I was genuinely really worried and scared. And that was the time that I was like really, extra cautious, and really went out less. I just became a more responsible citizen. And thankfully nothing serious happened. But yeah, I think people should be more considerate. And for people who are staying alone, like, I can understand to some extent the difficulties that they're facing. It would be very difficult, but I think that it's still really important to be responsible and just think of coping strategies to kind of overcome the loneliness that you might be feeling, like video calling and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've had people in our houses that we don't even know through Zoom conferences and webinars, and everything's gone virtual. And it's almost as close as you would get. Fine, you don't get that physical contact, but we're supposed to be staying away from each other anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's just living responsibly, thinking about others.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's shift gears and not talk about these sad things.
Fixing things, yeah.
Let's talk about your life as a teacher. Like, have you always been a teacher when you first came to Malaysia?
Yes. I'm not entirely sure I would classify the first year of my life in Malaysia as a teacher. I was teaching at a language center, so teaching English. And it was from ages 4 to 28.
Oh.
And then we introduced adult classes as well. And right at the beginning of when I decided I wanted to become a teacher, 15 years ago or whatever it was, I knew that I wasn't a primary school teacher. And then I had to teach 4-year-olds. I had to teach 4-year-olds English, which is not the easiest thing. I think the most difficult was that they were actually not entirely potty-trained, should I say. So kids would come to school and they would be like, she, and I'm like, what? What about she? Who? What? I'm like, and they would just go to the toilet and pee on the floor.
I'm going to stop you there for a while. Can I stop you there real quick? Like,
absolutely.
Is shishi a universal term for peeing? No?
No, absolutely. That's why I didn't know when this kid said it to me. I was like, are you talking about she over there, the girl? Yes. What about her? And it was like, she. I'm like, what I don't understand you. And he didn't know the word in English. And then after that, I realized that she was actually to pee. So, yeah. Definitely not a universal word.
So you knew what shishi was after he or she.
Yes, yeah. I think it was the first Mandarin word that I learned. Is it Mandarin?
No, it's not. I think it's Cantonese. Yeah, I don't think it's. Yeah, it's not Mandarin. It's definitely like Chinese people say shishi. Like I used to say shishi, but then I still say it sometimes. But then I think it's Cantonese. Yeah, it's definitely Cantonese. It's not like Mandarin Chinese.
Okay.
Very interesting. So
and then so after teaching there and realizing that that was not my calling, I looked for a history post teaching older kids who don't pee on the floor in front of me unless they're major issues, and I found a posting at the First International School, and that was another experience, quite different from South Africa. At first, the interview happened and that was all very normal. The school was very, very quiet. I wasn't used to not seeing kids right like in my face. They were kind of behind closed doors almost, which I didn't actually see the rest of the school until I was called back for a mock teaching, which I had never done before. And I was like, oh my gosh, am I going to have to teach in front of like kids or am I going to teach adults? I didn't know how it worked. So that was an interesting experience. But that went okay, I think. Well, I got the job, so I hope so.
Was it stressful?
It was very stressful because I was like, they said, okay, you've got half an hour, teach whatever you want. I'm like, anything? Like, give me some guidance or something. So I chose the Russian Revolution, which was so not anything that the kids were doing. But it was something that I liked, and I think there were 4 of them in the class, and they were very polite and very nice, and they just stared at me, and I'm like, okay, this means absolutely nothing to you guys, but okay, that's fine. So, it was interesting times, definitely.
At UBC, there are like mock lectures as well, when they're trying to hire new staff and faculty members. And it's so funny because no students would want to go attend lectures for like no reason, right? But they would incentivize us by saying that there's pizza there. So like,
Oh, well.
there are many times
Okay.
where I attended like mock lectures by faculty members who were like, who taught courses which is like not related to my major at all. But then, we would just go there to eat the food. And then when the food was finished, the students would leave.
So you could leave halfway through the lecture.
I mean, no one would stop you. It's not super ethical, but then, yeah, people do leave.
Oh
And
dear.
I was one of them, so I'm sorry to the faculty member.
Or maybe it was not that interesting of a lecture.
Yeah, they were teaching about like, I don't know, like the wind and the current and earth and ocean science thing. So yeah, I'm never a big fan of earth and ocean science. Like, oh, those courses drag down my GPA. Oh my gosh.
I'll remember not to teach that next time I have a mock teaching. If I ever.
I would stay for the Russian Revolution though.
Okay. Well, it is very interesting, and I thought it was quite a gruesome kind of period in time.
Yeah.
So I thought I would get some discussion. Yeah.
Aside from the mock teaching, how was it like in the international school? Did you meet interesting people, or did you have interesting experiences?
Bit of both, absolutely. There's so many cultures mixing at international schools. You've got kind of local teachers, and then there are more and more kind of expats from not just the UK but all over. So I met another South African, which was very exciting.
Right,
Love meeting
nice.
South Africans. But interesting characters, absolutely. The school had a bit of a problem with, that sounds terrible, an issue, should I say, with maintaining the principals. So within the 4 years, it was the 2 years that I was there, 2 and a bit years, 3 years, they had 5 principals.
Is that common for international schools?
No. Normally, I think most contracts are between 2 to 5 years, especially with senior leadership. So having kind of a principal each year is definitely not. But another thing that I did realize is that certain schools, you don't have to be perfectly qualified. Whereas in South Africa, we have to be a member of the South African Council for Educators, or you don't really get a job. Or if you're not, you could work at a private school as long as you have possibly a PhD or a master's.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, you have to, and you can only get registered with the Council for South African Educators. Yeah, I think that's what it's called. If you have a PGCE, which is the Postgraduate Certificate in Education.
Right.
But in Malaysia, it doesn't seem like that. There have been quite a few teachers who haven't had that, which not a problem. But then I realized that you don't even need a degree to get a job, like a bachelor's degree. So there have been people working at international schools without bachelor's degrees, or
Wow.
any kind of tertiary, like I think a diploma, and not in education. So
Right. So it's equivalent to like an A-level degree. No, it's not a degree, like A-levels qualification type of thing.
possibly, yeah.
Oh, that is
Yes.
very interesting. Like I cannot imagine myself teaching in an international school after doing my A-levels. Like I cannot even imagine teaching right now. But wow, that is certainly very interesting. So I assume you mentioned that you were in that school for 2 years, right?
It was actually 3 years. Yeah, around about 3.5 years. And then I met another South African living in my condo, and she suggested another school. She suggested I apply because the history teacher and geography teacher were leaving. She was actually leaving as well. She was the history teacher, so I replaced her.
Oh.
And so I went to a much bigger school. And what was refreshing was that they really kind of looked after you at the beginning. But
At the beginning?
At the beginning, things changed. I'm getting there. Every school has its politics, and this school kind of also was not without its politics. So when I first got offered the job, she was like, just beware of that person, keep your head down, don't let them know your name, and you'll be fine.
So there were like colleagues whom you actively tried to avoid.
Yes, and the good thing was, because it was so big, I don't think he actually knew my name, which was good, which means I was not on the list to be. I don't actually know what he would do to anybody, but I don't think he made life very nice for those people who he knew their names.
Oh my gosh, you're making him sound like one of those people who would send you to the gulags, like oh, he didn't know my name.
No, Stalin was so much funnier. I'm sure there's going to be something like that. But I think in all schools there's that kind of politics. But there tends to be, what I've experienced is that there's a big kind of difference between local teachers and expat teachers. Sometimes expat teachers kind of socialize with locals. Sometimes they really want to stay by themselves and just be kind of, I don't want to say British, but most of them are going to be British. They just keep to themselves. And then you get the younger expats who aren't really in it for the long run, and they come out and they don't think that things are going to stay with them. Whatever they do kind of is left in Malaysia. So whatever you do stays in Malaysia, and they tend to have a lot of fun because it is a very temporary thing for them. You have a 2-year contract, so you can reinvent yourself in a totally new country. As long as it doesn't affect your work and you have a degree, then you should be able to get a job. But there have been stories of people kind of entering into interesting relationships, and it's kind of like maybe first year for students, but you're older and you're earning money, so you have a lot of money to spend, and you can go a little bit crazy. It's quite interesting.
Yeah. I think this is very interesting, especially listening as a student. I think for a lot of us in our younger years, when we think about teachers, we think of them as these like people who dedicate their whole lives to their jobs, right? It's like I remember in my younger years, like it'd be surprising to see a teacher in the streets, like, oh my gosh, he has a life. So
no, we're not supposed to have lives. No, whatever I say. It's never happened. No, absolutely not. Yeah, you might be a little bit scared to hear just what some of these teachers do get up to. Again, it is the younger teachers, not the old ones with parents like me, all the ones with kids. But yeah, it is a bit of an eye opener when, even for a teacher, might have been there.
I mean, given that you were in Malaysia, or you have been in Malaysia for so long, I can imagine that you mix with both expat and local teachers, right?
Yes. It's very difficult to kind of just stay. Not that I would ever want to. As I said, some of the expat teachers can be a little bit tricky. But at the first international school, there was a much bigger local cohort of teachers. So, yeah, made some very good friends there. Even at the second school, made some very good friends, both local and expat. I think maybe coming from South Africa and kind of being very aware of racial tension, I try to avoid it, and any kind of divisions, whether it's based on skin color or nationality. Yeah, I like to meet people from different walks of life and everything like that.
Yeah, I only hope that there are more people like you. I think we need more of that in the world, because I think differences can be a very beautiful thing, right? We can learn from each other in so many different ways, and yeah, unfortunately, some people don't appreciate those differences, and they would view those differences as being lacking in equality and things like that, and interesting things to think about.
And yeah, the world is getting smaller, so we need to embrace certain differences.
In terms of befriending the local teachers or anyone in Malaysia, did you feel that there were cultural barriers that you had to face?
In ways, yes. Some ways, yeah. I think at the beginning, because I can be quite shy, so a lot of people think I'm snobby or the ice cream, but it's just because I'm shy. So I sit there and I'm scared of people. I don't want to talk to anybody. So at first, people don't really warm up to me as easily as I would hope. But once they get past that, and realize that I don't bite, then not really. I think what I have experienced is that I click, or I'm friends with people who also want to learn about other cultures and other people. So it's not really a cultural thing. I would say it's more of a mindset. I'm experienced meeting more people with a similar mindset. And it's from different cultures. But at the moment, no, I can't think of any major cultural barriers. Not that I can think of. No.
I guess that's nice. Because, I mean, if it's making it easier for you to make friends, then I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think also what might help is that, I don't know if it helps, but the fact that there are different cultures and there's a lot of diversity in Malaysia itself. People are more willing to hear somebody out, and it's not always based on a cultural or a background kind of thing. So I find people are quite warm because of that, possibly.
Definitely. It's really interesting things. So being a teacher for so many years now, have you met any interesting students? Wait, before that though, I keep thinking about when you say that you're a shy person, so it's difficult for you to make friends in the beginning. I'm trying to think of the first time we had you as our history teacher back at A levels. What was our first impression of you? I think I found you to be really quiet, right? Because I think we were discussing one of the papers, and then you had the slides on the board. Then you weren't as vocal as our previous history teacher. So then it was oh, this teacher is a little bit scary.
Boring. Oh, scary! Wow.
Scary. Yeah. Because I found you to be not boring, definitely not boring, but scary, because you were so quiet and you were really soft spoken and because because I don't know what you're thinking when you're quiet, so it makes me scared as well.
And that lasted for one day, and then I let out on my obsessions of certain dictators. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and to be fair, we were a small bunch, so it was easy for everyone to kind of know each other a bit more, and we are pretty vocal. At least I was super vocal all the time.
Asking questions, always good. Yeah, no, definitely. At least I could tell where you guys were. I mean, I had links with a lot of students from the previous school, so that also helped, I think. Helped me, at least, begin.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned that you were friends with our previous history teacher anyway, right? So I'm sure she filled you in before you came. Yeah, thinking about A-level history, though, I think it is such an underrated subject. Like, no, history itself is an underrated subject.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And it is my passion, so yeah.
And I'm not saying this because I'm speaking to you, my history teacher, right now, but history, A-level history, I think would be the most useful subject that I learned. Although I'm a psych major right now, I feel that in A-level history, I learned a lot more. Like, in terms of writing skills, building an argument, and especially in A2 history, where we had to be really specific about what we were arguing for, right? And when you have to compare different events and the significance of these events, I think these are really, really helpful skills. And like the writing skills that I learned at A-level history, I still apply when I write like university papers and things like that. Because being specific I think, is really important. And, like it's easier said than done, but many a time when people who lack uh, writing skills like this, and you read their writing, it's gonna be like, oh, okay, so what's your point? But
Exactly.
A-level history really taught me to be really tight in how I form those arguments and how I supported those arguments. So yeah, like I
I'm gonna
really
have to. Yeah, useful. I'm gonna need you to do a promo video for me, I think,
for
for the
A-level
next
history.
yeah, well, any kind of history. This is why you should do history.
Yeah,
You should do
and
mine.
and it's sad. Like I know that some international schools are getting rid of A levels in IGCSE history because like I can understand why they're doing that, because history as a subject, like when people think of history in Malaysia at least, or maybe even in the whole world, people just think of memorizing events and
Yeah,
dates and names of individuals and things like that.
absolutely.
But I think it's more than that. It's
Mm.
like when I look back at A level history now, I think of it as it's a class for you to practice arguing, and then the information are just like tools which you use to facilitate that argument, right? So
Yeah.
the main points actually come down to how you argue. Like, the information doesn't matter, right? Like you can search the information up to
Exactly. We've
psychological.
got the internet, and yeah, if you've got time, you can find out whatever you want. Um, yeah, the world, the net gives us so much. It's what you choose to use and how you use it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that also is why history can be a very difficult subject for people who are less verbal, in terms of writing and speaking, because you can't really study for it. Like you,
No,
yeah, because it's kind of
it's
like, I mean, for
it's a
me,
very passion subject. You gotta love it, or yeah, you're just gonna end up
yeah,
hating it, I think.
yeah, because like, I mean, I love history, so I still think about the content that I learned back in IGCSE and A levels. So you need to think about it deeply enough and reflect upon it for a long enough time for you to come up with those type of arguments, right?
Yeah.
Like for you to really make detailed and intricate comparisons between events, individuals, because the questions are always like, like how significant was this, right? How much of an effect did A have on B in relation to C, D, E, F, right? So
Yeah.
it's
And
like,
taking all the different perspectives into consideration, absolutely.
yeah, and if you only memorize those events and you don't, I guess, reflect upon how and like weigh the significance of each event, like basically, if you don't spend enough time thinking about the things that you learned, then it's really hard to ace a subject, I guess. For me, I was lucky because I loved history, so like it came pretty naturally for me to just keep thinking about the subject matter. But I can imagine that for some of my juniors who have spoken to me about A level history or even IGCSE history, like it must have been very difficult because they don't love the subject enough to think about it enough. Then as a result, they are unable to build arguments that are like nuanced and, I guess, strong for the purpose of the exam.
I think
Really
that's another
interesting.
really, I suppose it's key for me in my career when we have options evenings or anything like that, and parents come to me and like, why should my kid do history? I'm like, well, firstly, they've got to love it. If they don't love it, then don't do it. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not a reflection of me as a teacher. It's who they are. If they don't love it, it's not a problem for me. But they're not going to kind of learn to love it at that stage. And previously I'd be like, no, you got to do history. It's wonderful. Now it's like, if you don't love it, don't do it, please, because it's just going to ruin your life. And you're just going to end up hating everything and me. So, yeah, I think, which is not a great thing. I don't want anybody to hate me. Nobody does, yeah.
I mean, I can understand that. I wouldn't want anyone. No, I don't think anyone would want anyone to hate on him or her or them, right? Like, oh my
exactly. God. Very natural thing. Very natural.
Like when I think about my younger years, like when I was in grade 7, 8, and 9, and back when history was like a compulsory subject for us, a lot of my classmates didn't like history. So, did you have instances in your teaching career where like most, if not all of the class didn't like the subject?
Luckily, not all of the class, but yes, definitely experienced students who are totally against history. I had one kid come into class and he just, the minute he would walk in, he would shut off to the world and he couldn't get through, nothing would work. But when it was geography, it was slightly different. Then he would actually like listen and do the work. But for almost 2 years, I struggled with this kid and I was just like, what am I doing wrong or what is wrong? And it had to go to a much deeper level to realize that he had issues with history as an idea, I suppose. But he wasn't the only one who's hated history. There have been a lot who just don't want to do it and cannot wait until they can drop it. And they'll say it to me. They'll be like, can't wait to drop history. I'm like, okay, that's fine. That's your life, your loss. But yeah.
Did you manage to find out why he disliked history so much?
It triggered something from his parents' past, because he came from a country that had a lot of difficulty, historic difficulty, and the word history had been used in a negative context, I think, and then just coming into the class and me talking about looking at different perspectives and talking about history and all of that, it brought up a lot of memories and bad feelings, and he just shut down because of the word and the idea of history. Don't know if he's ever going to get over that, but yeah, we started on trying to find out, but it still made no difference. We still could not come to the class and take in anything, even if it was totally unrelated to his country or his past or his parents or anything like that. It just, the word was a trigger and he would black out almost.
Well, I mean, the conversation has become pretty psychological. Like, that shows how...
Oh, sorry. Yeah. It's like major.
That shows how impactful preconceptions can be, right?
Yeah,
I mean, this explains so many things, like, it could explain racism or depression or things like that, and they are not good. So I guess, well, that's a tip for the audiences who are watching. Be open to changing your preconceptions and ideas and notions about the world and yourself and other people as well. And that student with that attitude about history, that was probably me with, I think, art and ICT.
I think almost everybody will have a subject that they just really hate. I mean, I did at school. There was a language that I just couldn't stand. But yeah, I think it's normal to have one that just is not your cup of tea.
Yeah. I mean, at least for me with art, the art teacher, I think in my final art lessons, like the last few art lessons, he taught us about surrealism. So that one kind of piqued my interest a little bit. Like, oh, this is cool. You can look at artwork in so many different perspectives, and it just reminded me a little bit about history and English lit. So I was like,
connections, brilliant.
Yeah, because it's like analyzing stuff, but then it's just analyzing artwork, right? So rather than analyzing, instead of analyzing like words or events, you analyze artwork. So, which is pretty interesting. At least I found it to be interesting.
It can be, yeah. And ICT, you didn't like ICT?
No, I never liked ICT. I could be because I never did well in ICT, but like now I begin to kind of understand the importance of technology because I think for my age I'm like technologically senile. Like there's so many things that I'm so bad with the computer and with the iPad and with my own phone even. Like when I buy phones, like mobile phones, my only requirement would be that the battery is good. Other than that, I'm good. and then and then at
It's a good
university,
requirement.
yeah, like definitely, especially if you're always out and about. Right, not right now, but
Mm-hmm.
like pre-COVID times, right? Like I was in
Yeah.
Canada, I was always not in my room, so I needed a phone that would last me for at least a day. So Huawei is a pretty good option. I'm not sponsored by them. And
Not
then,
yet, not yet. Don't give it
not
time.
yet. Oh my gosh, I love your optimism.
Always there.
Wait, where was I? And then, yeah. Oh, speaking about like using the iPad and computers, I cannot imagine how people who are at IGCSE and A levels now uh, cope with online lessons. Because when I was an IGCSE and A level student, I like used technology minimally. All my notes were like handwritten, and I would never keep anything in my iPad or laptop. It was only at university that I started using the laptop, and I realized that I really had to because the content is just so much more. But like at A levels, I cannot imagine how people just I cannot imagine how people survive. No, how should I say it? I cannot imagine how people incorporate technology in their high school career. Like I I I cannot imagine how I would have done that. So really kudos to a lot of people. And oh my gosh, if COVID happened when I was at A levels, I would have struggled big time, especially with the computer and things like that.
You think that, but I mean, I think a lot of kids have handled it really, really well. I see kind of both those who prefer the paper and a pen and they want to do everything with the paper and a pen, and then others who just want it on a digital version so that they can manipulate it. And both are doing okay with the COVID. I mean, we have to work around it, so you would have managed. I'm sure, but you'd find a way to work around that.
Yeah, I mean, with online classes, you kind of have to anyway. Otherwise, you'll be left behind and it won't be nice.
But you're doing online now, yeah?
Yeah, I'm doing online now. I mean, right now I'm on summer break, but I've
Yeah.
been doing online classes since like last year, March. So I'm kind of like an OG in online classes now. Like,
What's that been like? I mean, like I know I'm studying, but mine is like a proper. It's meant to be online. What has it been like for you as a student moving online in university?
you need to be much more disciplined. That is one thing. Because for me, like my only issue is not only with the online thing, but also with the time zone. So I'm very lucky because most of my professors record the lectures and things like that. But then the difficulty comes when you have to watch the lectures because you can pause it. Like the temptation is there, you can just press pause anytime you want to. And like there are no classmates there. In like live classes and live meetings, it's easy to pay attention because you know that everyone is there, right? And you can't just
Yeah,
not pay
you
attention when
have
it's
you're
live.
forced to, yeah.
Yeah, but then with online, like I think in the whole of second year, so like from last year September to this year May, it's like the first time in my life where I have to kind of schedule my daily routines from like 12 a.m. to 12 a.m. all by myself. Because when you go to school and go to university for classes and things like that, a large chunk of your day is like institutionalized. Like it's kind of regulated by the institution, right? But then when it's
Yeah.
online, you have to regulate everything by yourself. And it's actually not as easy as you might think. Like you need a large amount of discipline. Like you need to firstly you need to catch up with the readings, right? And catch up with all the lectures because if you're like 1 or 2 days behind, like things won't be good. If you have like 3 lectures per day and you're 2 days behind, then you have 6. right? If you're like 1 week behind, then you have like 15 lectures to watch on top of the 15 in that week. So like, fortunately for myself, I've never done that. So I've never been super behind because I'm like always very worried that I wouldn't do well in exams. And I'm always reminding myself that I'm paying international school fees. So that kind of,
Yeah.
yeah, that kind of reminds me and acts like as an incentive for me to be more disciplined. But it's really not easy, I would say. Like, it's really, really not easy. So lectures is one thing. And it's hard to speak to the teachers, right? So when things are in person, I would approach the professors and lecturers a lot, especially where assignments are like essay based, because you need to ask for their opinions on a lot of things. And then when it's online, to ask one question, you have to write them an email, and then if that requires a meeting, you have to schedule a time, and then with the time zone and everything, the back and forth can take like 3 to 4 days just to schedule one small meeting. And like if you think about it from a psychological perspective, if even scheduling a meeting can have such a huge barrier, then the likelihood of you wanting to schedule meetings would be lower, which means that many a time you would let a lot of things slip, and these things add up, right? So it's not good. Like, I would say discipline is what I've learned the most from online lessons. Can be very demotivating as well. Like, I guess, I mean, for me, I love attending classes, like showing my nerdy side now. I love attending lectures. Like, I would ask questions, I would sit in the front row and things like that. And sometimes when I feel demotivated to study and I go to classes, I would feel motivated again because the atmosphere is there. You're around people who also want to learn, hopefully. Then you're
majority,
and you're seeing an educator who is passionate also, hopefully, to teach. And then that motivates me to continue studying. But when everything is like recorded online, it just feels so different. And
isolated.
I'm not sure if isolated would be the word. So like, I think more of independence. I can see how that would relate to isolation. But then I guess the more I think about it now, isolation would be the word. Feeling isolated. You're on your own for everything. And then, another thing about classroom atmosphere is that it reminds you that you have exams. I don't know. For me, it reminds me that we have exams because you're always in this hall and things like that. But when you're always at home, it's like sometimes I don't even feel nervous for any midterms. I still study for the midterms, of course, but then you wouldn't feel nervous because the atmosphere is just, oh, you're in your room again, or you're in the study room again, and it's like,
wow, okay. Do you miss being able to just ask somebody next to you a question or something like that? That interaction?
Not as much as asking the professors questions, because when I was at UBC, like, we were always in a hurry because UBC, like, the campus is huge, right? So you just have to rush from one class to another. So it's kind of funny because like you would sit next to this person for like the entire academic year, but then like you wouldn't really talk to that person unless you. I mean, like, especially if you have back-to-back classes. Like I arranged my classes to be back-to-back so that I could be done with my classes in the mornings. So like, I would always rush out of class before class even ended. Like, if the class ended at like 9:50, by 9:48, I'd be packing and leaving, running for the next class, right? So I wouldn't really talk with the people next to me a lot. Like, even if you do talk to them, you only text them, and the conversations are all just like course related, right? It's very rare that you. It's sad as well that you develop closer personal relationships. At least that was my experience. Like, I didn't really make friends from my courses. I made friends from elsewhere, like from badminton, from my dorm, from orientation week and things like that. So yeah, one thing that I definitely miss the most would be talking to the professors. And like, I remember this one time, this was back in second year, first term. So like back in September, October last year. And I took this sociology course. It was an elective, so I took a level 1 elective. So automatically, what that means is that you would be having lessons with a bunch of first years, right? And then the professor assigned like a paper. He was like, hey, write this research paper. And then I saw a lot of questions in the chat like, hey, are we supposed to Google to find the information? Are you supposed to use the school library? Like, how's the spacing and everything supposed to be? What font are we supposed to use? What is APA formatting, right? And then when I saw those questions, my instinct was like, oh my gosh, why do people ask questions like that? And then I suddenly am reminded of the fact that I'm having classes with people in their first year. So they have never had that exposure before. And then I think back about my own first year, I probably had some questions that they had as well. But I had the benefit to like speak with the professor and pester him before and after classes, right? And they did not have such a benefit. And like I feel bad for them. Well, of course, I feel bad for myself as well to some extent. But then, yeah, it's really sad to see how we miss out on a lot of things. Yeah.
I was going to ask, do you feel like you've missed out on a part of your university experience because of this virus?
Definitely. Like, I never imagined that I would be having classes at home. Right. Like, I mean, I don't want to be all pessimistic. There are, upsides of being at home as well. I mean, if you're talking about COVID, it's much more safe. And then, although it's hard to manage your time because you need to be very disciplined, you save a lot of time as well, like travel time and things like that. So you get to do more things, do more other things. Like they may not be immediately related to university, but then productivity, something. Yeah, I did procrastinate, so it did not do me good. So don't procrastinate, people.
That definitely. I think that is one thing that a lot of people are struggling with, is that procrastination and just thinking, I'll just get in front of the screen in my pajamas. It's fine. Nobody's going to care. Everybody else is doing it as well. So.
Do you think teachers procrastinate? Like, do teachers? They do, right? They're human as well.
Yes. If you want the truth, even without the pandemic, we do procrastinate. Marking, I think, is a very common thing that we put off until the end. Sitting there with a pile of stuff. It depends on how big it is, but like, definitely marking.
This reminds me of something. At UBC, the professors are actually allowed to hire markers. So in the context of high schools, are you guys allowed to do that?
No, well, not the ones that I've worked at. It would be amazing. I would absolutely love it. I would pay people to mark. I think certain subjects are easier. So like your sciences and maths, where there's one word answer, and that's very easy. I have tried to get my husband to help me with certain history questions. I'm like, okay, the one word answer, just look for that with like year 7 and 8. But other than that, we got to look and see, and it would be really nice though to have an assistant.
Right, and then with history, there's a lot of writing as well. So if the student's handwriting is as awful as mine, then oh my gosh. Oh yeah, my handwriting
yours
is so
has
awful.
not been the worst.
Oh, okay.
I promise you. There was one recently. A girl was writing, and I'm like, I don't know what you're saying, and she didn't even know what she was saying, and I was like, okay, we got to work on your writing, please.
Oh, okay, at least I could recognize my own handwriting. Like I can identify the words and things like that. Like I know that my handwriting is bad, but I can read my own handwriting.
It actually, I think that's one of our, maybe it's the superhero skill, our powers. It's a superhero power that we can read almost any handwriting as teachers.
Yeah.
I do pride myself on that, except for this one girl. I was just like, no, I really have no idea. I've seen bad, but that was bad. That was really bad.
I mean, handwriting though is really interesting to think about, because in my younger years, my teachers would be like, hey, if your handwriting continues to be this bad, then at university, the lecturers won't mark your stuff. And I'm like, What? I mean, like, even without COVID, a lot of things were just typed out. So I
Exactly,
had to-
yeah.
yeah. So, oh well.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Speaking of your teaching career, the nosy side of me wants to ask, like, have you met any interesting students before? Like, other than the one who hates history, have you met students who have been like behaviorally not super well? I mean, I
Well,
like
yet
to think that,
again.
like, I like to think that I'm a
um,
well-behaved student. I never really got in huge trouble, from what I can recall.
okay, if you haven't been suspended or expelled, then no, you should be fine. But I think every single school I have worked at, there has been a behavioral issue from smoking weed
Oh my
on
god.
school field, actually, that's one. Vaping is another very popular thing recently. Vaping has become the thing to do at school in the bathrooms. I've heard of quite a few cases of kids being caught in the bathrooms vaping while school's happening. One, I think a big difference from South Africa and Malaysia is when we go like on school trips or anything like that. A major concern for South African teachers is kids getting drunk because most of them are going to be under the age of 18. So we have to be very, very careful of that. And it sort of happens in Malaysia, but it's not as bad as it is in South Africa. That's how I feel. I think alcohol is not the biggest thing, but definitely smoking and weed, smoking different types of things. Yeah, absolutely.
Weed though, like, is that even legal in Malaysia? I don't think so, right?
It's not legal in South Africa either, but yeah, it happens everywhere. And you can get it. I have smelt it. I'm sure I've smelt it somewhere in Malaysia. Maybe it was just my pregnant nose.
I smelt it. Well, actually, I smelt it when I was in like school camps.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is interesting. But when I was at UBC, I smelled weed all the time because university's still there.
Is it legal in Canada?
Yeah.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, and like so like there's this library called IKB, I think Irving K. Barber Library, and then right outside the library there's this like super long street because the library is pretty huge. So then I think people informally call it the weed street because people would smoke weed there. It's like the entire street would smell of weed, right? And it's so funny because it's right outside the library.
Okay. Yeah, I think that might be a common theme at universities. There's like one street where there's just weed. That's where it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was surprised that at how kind of big a concern it was in Malaysia. That above alcohol, which was quite amazing.
Yeah. And oh my gosh, this reminds me of the first time where I tried to go to a fraternity party. So this is orientation week, right, at UBC. And then a lot of my friends were just like, hey, you should go to the frats. And like, I mean, I'm not a big fan of partying. I don't drink alcohol. I don't smoke cigarettes or weed. So I was like, not super keen, but then they dragged me there, right? And then they went in. And then I didn't go in, but like the outside was enough to scare me away because it was so like everything smelled so bad and just like I don't know, the place didn't seem to be super hygienic because it was like a small frat house and so many people were inside dancing, sweating, smoking, like so I left. And yeah, like nowadays you probably don't get the chance to party like that, at least in Malaysia, especially with COVID right now.
Yeah.
And this reminds me that I haven't actually been to a club before in Malaysia. Like, damn it, I didn't go. I was supposed to go after A levels, but then because I wasn't keen, so I kept procrastinating and like postponing that. And then now, like, there's no more clubs open anymore right now. So, but that's probably a good thing to do for the time being, right?
Yep.
Well, I see that we are. It's almost been an hour. Well, I guess one closing question would be, do you have any advice or tips or suggestions for the students out there who are learning everything online, or teachers who are teaching online?
I think teachers, I think we've heard everything, probably students as well, but I think you said it best with time management. Just learn to manage your time and definitely ask for help, whether it's if it's an emotional issue, whether it's a timing issue. It is unprecedented times, so yeah, you've just got to ask for support, assistance, help, whatever you can get.
Yeah, certainly very important. Like being disciplined obviously is important, but we also have to take care of ourselves physically and mentally, make sure we're healthy. And yeah, thank you so much, Miss Holly.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. To the viewers, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. So today's chat with Khian, and be sure to check out FNK Concept on Shopee or Lazada. Local products at reasonable prices. Until next time, I'll see you in another episode of Chat with Khian. Bye bye.